Friends, welcome to this lecture in the Sunday evening series organized by the Theosophical Society Point Loma. This is the second lecture in a series of 4 with the general theme, the essence of Universal Brotherhood. In the previous lecture, we discussed the deepest depths of Universal Brotherhood, which is, you could say, the foundation, the inner wisdom behind Universal Brotherhood, behind the compassion for all living things. The Theosophia is another name for the universal wisdom. This implies that its teachings and its ethics are universal. This naturally raises the question, if these fundamental ideas are indeed universal, then they must also have been taught in all times and cultures and can be found in all major religious scriptures. Is that indeed the case? Tonight we will delve into this fascinating subject. But if you do not want to drown in the great number of outer differences of the orthodox teachings of the several religions, keep in mind, try to look beyond the external forms and symbols to find the universal core behind all. This is beautifully expressed by the Persian Sufi Jalal al-Din Rumi, who compares the different religions to lanterns. Here we come. The lanterns are different, but the light is the same. It comes from the other side. If you look at a lantern, you are lost, for it evokes the illusion of number and diversity. Concentrate on the lights, and you will see beyond the duality inherent in the finite body. Oh, you who are the core of existence, the differences between Muslim, Mazdi, and Jew depend on this perspective. This lecture, which focuses specifically on Universal Brotherhood, gives you a taste of the richness of ancient traditions. You can see it as a first introduction, a stepping stone, to the 4 lecture series we want to present to you in the spring, from March till June, because these 4 series are entirely devoted to 4 rich sources of universal wisdom: the Egyptian African religions, the Eastern traditions, ancient Greek philosophy, and the original Christian wisdom traditions. These sources are not only very valuable sources of wisdom, they are also historically closely connected to each other. We give now an overview of the questions we go into tonight. First, what is the origin of the great religions and philosophies? Then, can the basic idea of boundless life be found in them? Thirdly, do we recognize the principle of fundamental connectedness in all religions? Then, do we recognize the idea compassion knows no exceptions in the wisdom writings, for instance towards animals? And finally, what implies Universal Brotherhood in practice? So we start with the question, what is the origin of the great religions and philosophies? This was also an important topic in our lectures of 2 and 9 November about the universal theosophical movement and the true meaning of religion. In all great philosophical worldviews, we can discern with more or less difficulty one universal wisdom. If you search for the basic ideas, then you will find them in the philosophies of Plato, of the Stoics, and of the Buddhists, as well as in the great religious impulses such as the ancient Egyptian religion, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, the Jewish faith, Christianity, and Islam. These systems are all different expressions, packagings, so to say, of certain parts of the one universal wisdom, also called the Theosophia. Those parts that were appropriate and necessary to spread at that time and that place. This one universal wisdom or Theosophia was known in the past by countless names, including secret doctrine, Chokhmah, Gupta Vidya, Gnosis. And what is that universal wisdom? It is the integral, all-encompassing knowledge of the cosmos and of man. What our origin is, what our distant destination is, who we really are. That divine wisdom or theosophy is as deep and far-reaching as an ocean, but it is also shallow enough at the shores not to overwhelm the mind of a child. This theosophia is guarded, preserved, and transmitted by generations of highly advanced people, the adepts or masters of wisdom and compassion. They have united in one lodge of wisdom and compassion, with the aim of illuminating humanity on the very long path of human growth, showing their fellow men the way by teaching, encouraging, warning, and inspiring. How are these masters of wisdom and compassion referred to in the past in the several traditions? Well, we will mention a few. In the Islam, the friend of God or Wali. In Christianity, Christos, an anointed one. The North American people speak of a peacemaker. The Aztecs, the Maya, they know the winged serpent, the Quetzalcoatl. In South Africa, he who knows. In Buddhism, a bodhisattva. In Hinduism, a rishi, a mahatma, a naga, or a dvitya. And how does the Lodge of Wisdom of Compassion work? Its sole purpose is to enlighten and assist humanity, and indeed all life, on the long path of evolution. Its members work constantly and continuously. At very specific periodic times, the Lodge of Wisdom sends a messenger among the people to remind them once again of the purpose and meaning of life. This happens when the earlier messages have been forgotten or have become covered with a very thick layer of misunderstandings and distortions. A significant fact is, all messengers said that they only bring, in another form, the same old wisdom. They bring it in a form that is more suitable for their times. They always emphasized, I have come to dust off the message of my predecessors, so to speak, to blow away the misconceptions, the dogmatism, and the selfishness. They always emphasized that with the universal keys in hand, Christians can discover treasures of wisdom in their own Christian writings and symbols, and that exactly the same is true for Hindus, in their wisdom, Buddhists, Parsis, Muslims, etc. Each can go back to the source of their own religion, to its original ideas, and find there the unadulterated, undiluted, universal truths. Before we dive into ancient literature, but we should realize, I think, one thing. Religious and philosophic texts, as well as symbols, myths, heroic tales, rarely have only one meaning. They are usually multi-layered, precisely because there is a universal truth behind them. They have a spiritual, mental, and material meaning. And each symbol can also be applied on the cosmic level and on the human level. As we grow in vision, we will discover more and more meanings behind the same myths and symbols. So be aware of the first impulsive enthusiasm when you recognize some piece of wisdom. Now I have deciphered this symbol. Because behind this symbol lie many more deeper meanings. Ali, and I mean now the disciple and esoteric successor of Muhammad, said about the Quran. There's no verse in the Quran that does not have 4 meanings. And as we grow in insight ourselves, we begin to see more and more in each symbol. Well, now, time to start with. Can the universal principles of theosophy be found in all religions and major philosophies? We will go through the 3 fundamental propositions, the 3 pillars of universal wisdom that we discussed at length in the previous lecture. As a reminder, these 3 principles are not separate from each other. One cannot exist without the other. In fact, they form a single, coherent philosophy of life. The first pillar of theosophy is the most fundamental. The boundlessness of life, of which all beings are an inseparable part. All beings originate from the same one boundless life. They form an inseparable whole without boundaries. They therefore cannot exist without each other, not even for a second. How did the sages refer to this principle, which is in fact unthinkable and unspeakable? And why did they choose the terms they chose? This is a valuable question. Let us examine a few. The Jewish Kabbalah calls this principle Ein Sof, and that means without limits. Plato called it apeiron, the unlimited. Lao Tzu spoke of Tao, immediately adding in verse 1, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. You see, with these terms, the sages wanted to give us this clear hint. The principle is limitless, so it is behind all beings, however high or low. Because all beings have a certain limited scope of understanding, even the highest being that we can imagine. The principle encompasses all beings, and the number of beings is endless. Let us continue. In Buddhism, the boundless is called sunyata, the great emptiness. The Gnostics, the mystical Christians, called it pleroma, and that means the great fullness. Here we encounter an interesting paradox. Both of these terms are thought-provoking. The great fullness evokes the image of an all-encompassing living cosmos. Nowhere in the universe is there a speck of that matter. And all those beings in all ranks and classes, they fill space. No, I'm saying it wrong. Space is not filled with beings, no. As you can put packages in a large box, No, all those beings are space. Boundless space is their very essence. And the great emptiness of Buddhism evokes in us the insight that this unspeakable essence, that is our common root, is so far beyond any human conception, so far beyond all forms, that it seems empty to us. We cannot imagine it. For us, it is emptiness. Then, the Maya, in their Popol Vuh, one of the very few works that have been handed down from them, speak of the great sea of space. The Hindu calls the boundless para-Brahman, a very accurate philosophical approach. Para means beyond. Therefore, para-Brahman means beyond Brahman, and Brahman is the one underlying source and essence of our cosmos, the deepest that we, living in this cosmos, can ever realize. But there is something beyond for us, the one Brahman, and that is para-Brahman. And as a last example, in the Upanishads, Hindus read about the boundless as Tat, which means, heel simply, that. A beautifully concise, super abstract term. Consider, if we designate everything that exists, seen or unseen, in the material or spiritual realms, as this, then there is also that, which cannot be pinned down. Unfortunately, the principle of the boundless has been often misunderstood and forgotten. The fact that the boundless is within us, that it is our deepest core, has been neglected or even purposefully ignored throughout the centuries in many religious movements. People began to attribute human characteristics to the boundless. Think of the Greek myths in which we encounter gods who interact with each other in a less than inspiring way. A human television soap opera is nothing compared to it. In Christianity and Islam, most believers assume that there is one supreme God who created everything and is therefore responsible for everything. In Hinduism, millions of Hindus make daily offerings to one of the thousands of gods they know. And among all these followers, there are undoubtedly many who are sincerely devoted to a kind of divine order, but they still lack the golden key to understanding themselves in life, and the result is they seek the divine outside themselves, rather than in their own conscience, in their own insight and sense of unity, in the utmost depth of their own consciousness. And the consequence was they became dependent on what their caste of priests told them what they should do. And by priests we mean all people who set themselves up as mediators of whatever faith. The unfortunate consequence of this is that people restricted their thoughts to their faith, rather than broadening their view by their own search for truth. Independent thinking and taking personal responsibility, essential elements for the progress of humanity, then became compromised. Sometimes even they were taught to look to other faiths as unworthy or even highly dangerous. It caused, as you know, an enormous lot of cruel religious suppression and war. The sages foresaw this danger, and that's why the sages use terms as the unlimited, or beyond the highest conceivable, when describing the utmost essence of all. We now turn to the second pillar of universal wisdom. Every being carries boundless abilities within itself and gradually develops them. This principle follows logically from the first pillar, boundlessness. Do we recognize it in the wisdom texts? In the more mystical works, all beings are presented as sparks, symbolic sparks from the boundless fire, or as drops in the immeasurable ocean of life. These are evocative images, because the spark carries the same essence as the fire, and so does the drop in relation to the ocean. Outwardly, we may seem to be, as human beings, small beings in the midst of universes, but within us lives exactly the same boundless essence. That's why we have boundless potentials within us, which we will explore and activate throughout the eons. In the Indian philosophy, this inspiring thought is taught as Tat Tvam Asi, that art thou. That is the unspeakable principle behind everything, as you know. The sixth, see every human being as a spark of the one light that shines through every human being. Apostle Paul says, the Spirit of God is in you. Why then should we still consider ourselves sinful and stumbling beings? We are gods in the making. The same idea lies behind the Buddhist expression, all beings, without exception, possess a Buddha nature. We are children of the cosmos and therefore carry all the wisdom of the cosmos within us. Next, what is the third pillar or fundamental principle? It is our inner growth is cyclical and based on cooperation. In short, we are no mayflies born for a single short life period of 80 or 100 years. We find confirmation of this in all religions. In ecclesiastical Christianity, most adherents think that people, after dying, go to some heaven or hell, a state of being where nothing can change anymore. This dogma has been introduced sometime, perhaps many centuries, after the real founding of Christianity. It is, in fact, a very frightening one, the dogma, and a very strange one, because there is nothing in nature that does not constantly change, passing from one state to another. It is certainly not the teaching of universal wisdom. No, we always move from one growth cycle to the next growth cycle. Do we find this idea of cyclical growth reflected in the ancient symbols? We encounter it very abstractly in the universal symbol of the circle, which makes a circular movement that never stops. In Buddhism, there is the wheel of life, pointing to the cycle of reincarnation. In several cultures, we find the symbol of the snake biting its tail. This symbol stresses the idea that the end of each cycle, so the tail, is always immediately the start of the next. The circle and the snake are, by the way, among the most universal symbols. The fact that we gradually develop our consciousness and that therefore each cycle takes place on a slightly more developed, more spiritual level is also reflected in the snake symbol. After all, a snake's sheds its skin every year and emerges renewed and a little bit larger. The same idea of cyclical growth can also be beautifully represented by climbing a mountain via a spiral path that winds around the mountain higher and higher. One of the main consequences of the three pillars we dealt with is the fact of the connectedness of everything with everything. Can we recognize that key thought in all the religious traditions? And here are some important texts, we think. The African Ubuntu philosophy teaches us, I am because we are. It is always the community of life that makes everyone's individual existence possible. A very theosophical thought. In India, in the Maha Upanishad, we read, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and that means the whole world is one family. Most, if not all, indigenous peoples see it as their sacred duty, and in fact our sacred duty of whole humanity, to live in harmony with all groups of beings in the cosmos. The animals, the plants, the nature spirits, the mountains and rivers, and many heavenly beings. Because we are dependent on them. Here too is a thought from which we in our Western culture could derive many valuable lessons. This image of remaining in balance through all developments is brought forward, for example, in the North American Cherokee people's vision of the creation of the world. They say that our world came from the great ocean and is in fact a condensation of it, a kind of clump of mud. That clump was hoisted out of the ocean on 4 ropes. And since then we hang above the ocean. The ropes remain strong as long as enough people lead noble lives. But if we humans continue to disrupt the natural balances, we create imbalance. And who among us can say what will happen when the earth begins to tilt and to swing back and forth? Such is the intuitive view of life of the Cherokee. Food for thought, in our opinion. We will now discuss a symbol that wonderfully illustrates the cosmic connectedness. We encounter this symbol really on all continents, in ancient and modern cultures. It is the universal symbol of the tree of life. Many religions have indicated that we can compare the structure of the cosmos to a tree whose roots reach into the unknown endless fields of the boundless. Therefore, in this picture, we deliberately turned the image upside down. The tree has one main trunk, thus originating from a unity, from one spiritual core. As the tree grows from top to bottom, it becomes increasingly differentiated, showing ever greater external diversity, reaching its maximum in the relatively most material realm, the leaves as it were. In ancient religions, we encounter the tree of life as, in Scandinavian mythology, Yggdrasil. In Indian mythology, Ashwata. In ancient Egyptian religion, the acacia tree. In Celtic Buddhism, Kran Betat. In many countries, trees were seen as the central point where religious gatherings took place. And a remarkable example was discovered not so long ago, in 1998, at the coast near Norfolk, England, as you can see on this photo. Part of the seabed there had fallen dry, and to everyone's surprise, a circle of 55 oak pillars was found, with in the middle an upside-down tree, its roots pointing upwards. It is called Seahenge, a variation on Stonehenge in southern England. The tree of life is so suitable an image as a symbol because you can derive many valuable insights from it. Let us think about some of its main meanings. The main trunk of the tree comes from the roots in the super spiritual realms and is rooted in the boundless unity. And that unknown source is formless, as we know, because it is omnipresent. It is neither young nor old, because it exists forever. In short, it escapes our highest reaches of thought, and therefore we cannot see its roots. It is under the ground. In the tree, the one life expresses itself in the great variety of twigs and leaves, but it is and remains one life. One and the same life sap flows through the whole, down to the thinnest twig. Through countless vessels, each twig is connected to every other twig. One leaf may grow on a low branch and another on a high one, yet they are all connected. Their well-being is connected, is linked. The larger branches create the suitable environment and opportunities for the relatively smaller branches. And each smaller branch is itself a larger branch for the still smaller branches, and so on and so forth. This reflects the hierarchical structure of the entire cosmos, in which the relatively more developed beings have the task of creating the suitable environment or force field in which the less developed can exist and evolve. As we can see from the structure of the tree, this principle is constantly repeated, as above, so below. And this also points to our task as human beings, as one of the middle branches of the tree, as transformators of divine inspiration and knowledge. Have we humans made our thinking receptive to the wisdom of higher beings, to the sap of the higher branches? And are we able to pass on that divine wisdom to the lower branches? What kind of influence do we exercise through our thinking and our decisions on our fellow human beings and on the animals and on the plants? Few people realize this role of humanity, but it follows logically from this image. Finally, every being in the tree of life, each branch can be also seen as a micro tree of life in itself. We humans, for example, are a microcosm of the macrocosm. And that's why we can grow independently in wisdom. Our next topic concerns the application of the insights we have presented. Do we recognize the basic characteristic of Universal Brotherhood? Compassion knows no exceptions in all major spiritual systems. By compassion, we mean being concerned with the welfare of all our fellow pilgrims on the path of human evolution and promoting the harmonious spiritual growth wherever we can. Being compassionate does not mean constantly looking for ways to help others. Above all, it is a continuous attitude, a 24/7 vision. You see the tasks that lie before you, it may be small, it may be large, as a contribution to the whole. And by whole, we do not mean one group, not only the people we are attracted to because we like them, but the entire network of lives. In the Maha Prajna Paramita, we read a bodhisattva, that is someone who has become one with his higher nature, has as much respect for all beings as he has for the other bodhisattvas. Each being is the expression of a divine ray. The Bible is also clear on this point. Love your enemies. Behind such a principled attitude lies a profound knowledge. If we respond to any hostile actions towards us with equality and justice, we sow seeds of thought that will gradually change the nature and intention of our relationship with these people. If we persevere, they will certainly, even if it takes several lifetimes, first approach us neutrally and then amicably and helpfully. In short, what we sow, we will reap. Every unlucky cycle of mistrust and tension and struggle can be harmonized in this way. Lao Tzu, in Paradox 49 of the Tao Te Ching, puts it this way: I am goods to the goods, because they are goods. And I am good to the not goods, so that they may become goods. This reflects the principle of compassion very well. Of course, it is a great challenge to find in every situation the right approach. For example, for people who still have to discover their own ethical compass. It is a challenge to help, for instance, those people to awaken their sense of responsibility for other beings and to gain control over their lower nature. Let's go one step further. Universal Brotherhood has no limits. It encompasses all kinds of beings, in fact, all kingdoms of nature, so including all the animals. We therefore want to pay attention to animals. It is common knowledge that there are currently few cultures in the world that consistently consider animal welfare in their actions. This could be much better. Can we draw inspiration from religious scriptures? Before we mention a few special passages, there is first this question: what are animals? They are, just like us, cosmic pilgrims, immortal at their core. And because they originate from the same boundless life, they are fundamentally equal to us. Like us, they carry all the cosmic qualities within themselves, although somewhat less fully developed than in our case. We can therefore truly view animal beings as our younger brothers. Some people all over the world may intuitively understand this. And we see this a lot among Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. Such a follower would never unnecessarily trample an insect or torture an animal. They grant them their life because all beings yearn to live and yearn for happiness. Compassion knows no exceptions. In which religions do we see an echo of this fundamental respect for animals? Are there passages that emphasize the equality of man and animal? We think so, although at first glance there don't seem to be many. We begin with the ancient Indian epic poem, the Mahabharata. One of the Pandavas, one of the great heroes in that story, is Yudhishthira. After a life of 101 trials, all of which he overcomes, he has now entered the final phase of his life. On his travels, he is constantly being accompanied by a dog, who remains ever faithful to him. And then comes the moment when he stands before the gates of heaven, and the heavenly beings guarding these gates tell him, Yudhishthira, you can enter, but your dog cannot. Oh, the hero immediately responds, if that is the case, then I choose to stay outside heaven, together with my dog. My faithful dog would never leave me. I will not leave him either. And just as he had made that decision, the gates of heaven swung open for both of them. He had passed his very last trial by his compassionate attitude. He was willing to sacrifice his own heavenly happiness, perhaps forever, for an equal living soul under his care. This story, like all other symbolic stories, has more than one layer of meaning. If we, as humans, as totality of humans, want to progress towards divinity, we can only do so if we help the animal beings to ascend. And that's a theosophical teaching. A second example is a tradition, a hadith from the Islam. This tradition states, a prostitute saw a dog circling a well on a very hot day, and the dog was panting with thirst. In her awoke great pity, and she took off her shoe, filled her leather sock with water, and gave water to the dog. And the hadith concludes with, for this act, the woman was forgiven by Allah. This brought her to heaven. You see, our inner motives are decisive for our destiny, not our outward appearances, and not the way we are estimated within a certain society. That means nothing. As you know, a dog is not estimated highly and a prostitute neither. When we speak of this subject, we cannot separate the animals from their living environment, the ecosystems. Do ancient traditions talk about ecosystems as well? Here too, many beautiful examples can certainly be cited. We begin with the Maori philosophy of life. The Maori are, as you know, the original inhabitants of New Zealand. In their view, everything is alive, including a river, which is a complete living community. For many years they have been campaigning for the protection of the Wanganui River. Now, after many years, the New Zealand government has granted legal rights to that river, thus legally establishing the need for its protection. And in this respect, New Zealand is the first country in the modern world to do so legally. Another example, which is perhaps less well known, concerns some poor regions in China more than 2000 years ago. There were Taoist farming communities there at that time, and they tilled and cared for the land according to a precise set of ecological rules, and with success. You see, the environmental movement is an old one. This reminds us also of the Bishnoi people in India, who have been providing a similarly beautiful example for many centuries. They live in an arid part of Western India and also follow a set of rules that are very fascinating to study. In these dry regions, when people plant young trees, They make themselves responsible for their protection and care for 2 years, allowing them to thrive and grow despite the drought. Excuse me. They also give 10% of their harvests to wild wildlife, such as gazelles. The fact that Universal Brotherhood encompasses more than just our responsibility for our fellow human beings is reflected in many traditions. We now come to the important questions. How do we realize Universal Brotherhood in practice in our modern, complex societies? Do religions offer us pieces of inspiration for this? Well, in fact, scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, many Buddhist works, the Tao Te Ching, Plato's dialogues, and many others are full of building blocks for translating the principle of unity into practice. One of the key thoughts that can be found in Plato's Republic and also found in the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, and also in the rules for the Buddhist monastic order called the Sangha, is this. You contribute to the whole, whatever you are able to, with your present character and vision. Everyone realizes that they are, as it were, a necessary organ within a larger body. And just as the kidneys purify the blood to the best of their ability, which is their talent, and the lungs provide oxygen, so too can every person in its community utilize his talents and strengths in such a way that everyone benefits. This can be done while we are at each stage of development, with the wisdom we have presently gathered. In fact, people with a mental limitation can do so, surely, too, and often prove to contribute to the community wholeheartedly with all their engagement. So the ideal is not far off. It is about seeing yourself in the light of unity. What does Universal Brotherhood mean in practice? We wanted to conclude our focus on this with this important ancient rule of life. Be the example of your principles. Be the living example of the ideals you hold up to others. How else could a wise word from us make any spiritual impression on our fellow human beings? Remember, we are, as human beings, like mental magnets, radiating a sphere of force, a mental force around us. We radiated the true nature of our thoughts, whether we express those thoughts openly or not. All our actions are mentally stamped by the character of the thoughts behind them. In short, doing good outwardly while not being really involved in the well-being of the other, what the other really needs, spiritually, mentally, and physically, is a foolish, contradictory action. We wish to present now a very insightful view on Universal Brotherhood, based on the ideas of Yehuda Bauer. Yehuda Bauer was a professor of Holocaust studies, reflecting on everything that had happened during World War II. He arrived at 3 key thoughts. Don't be a perpetrator of injustice. This needs no explanation. By being a perpetrator, you harm others. And because you reap everything you sow, you harm also yourself. Secondly, don't be a victim of injustice. Well, this might raise a question, because when some injustice happens to us, that is simply a fact. We cannot deny it. But that is not what it means. It means whatever happens to you, maintain your dignity. Don't abandon the noble principles you have built up in your lives. Etty Hillesum once wrote, it takes two people to humiliate someone. You need the person who humiliates, and you need the person who feels humiliated. But she says, when you refuse to be humiliated, the humiliation does not succeed. Thirdly, don't be a passive spectator of injustice. Don't look away from injustice. That makes you co-responsible. But instead, contribute to restore justice. Think of the Danish resistance during World War II, which very efficiently brought many Jewish people to Sweden. Think of the non-violent actions Gandhi employed in India. I recently read about an inspiring example of don't be a perpetrator, don't be a victim, and don't be a passive bystander. And it was about Joseph Rowntree. In the late 19th century, Rowntree was the director of a large chocolate factory in York, England. At a time when most factory workers still worked long, hard days, earned next to nothing, and were looked down on as inferior, he saw his employees as equals, with the right to live in decent circumstances and to develop themselves. He offered his employees, among other things, a pension, decent housing, free education, a library, gymnastics, theater, and medical care. He was also very active in society. He sought to combat the causes of social inequality everywhere in the society, seeing that the philanthropy of that time was merely a bitter band-aid solution. He strongly advocated scientific research into the causes of poverty in order to address these causes more efficiently. Furthermore, he was a pacifist. A valuable example, we believe, of someone who did not passively accept the general norms of his time, nor did he wish to be a passive observer of the abuses prevalent among the working class at that time. His source of inspiration was Quaker philosophy. Friends, we have come to the end of this lecture. We start now a pause of 3 minutes in which you can ask questions via the chat function of YouTube, or via the mail to questions@blavatskyhouse.org. And after the break, we will first discuss your questions. Then we will switch to the study session on Zoom. But first, we see you over 3 minutes. Till then. Hello all again. Well, Mariska, you have looked whether there are questions?
Yes, I did, and there's one question.
Yeah.
And that question is about a bit of the earlier part of your lecture. You said there that all texts are multi-layered, so you can read them at different ways. But doesn't that make it very hard to communicate among each other about those texts? And understand them the same way?
Yeah. You can also say that it is in fact a deliberate method of the wise people. They can, by using, for instance, a symbol or a kind of analogy or a kind of other image, which has many layers, then that means that it will, how do you call it, activate in all people the idea from, there is something behind this. I must think about it. So you do not bring something as a sort hard of fact. So it is, Believe me, no. You bring a symbol, a wonderful analogy, something which seems to be very illogical. From how is that possible? And the first thing what happens is that people start thinking themselves, looking for. And if one, and that is the beautiful symbol of the elephant and the blind people, it is of course to be expected that one person has the tail of the elephant and he describes the meaning as this, and the other has the ear of the elephant, describes as this, and that only enriches the whole image. So when you are simply do not see that as confusion, but as a possibility to in fact enrich each other, so that the image becomes more rich, more complete, more true, then yeah, then I think the multi-layered idea is a certain wise way. In a certain way, it has also this reason. You may say that the universal wisdom has very deep layers, and some of them, some knowledge, can be misused. And so it is very important that the people who guard the Theosophia give their ideas, give their knowledge, but in such a way that misuse is prevented. So that's why knowledge which can be misused is really hidden behind deep symbols. Yeah. And only those persons who are ready for it will discern it. And it is safe for all other people. They simply don't change it. So there is also another rather serious aspect to it, that not all knowledge should be spread at the moment in this world with humanity, with present ethical possibilities. That would be not wise.
Yeah, and what I hear in your answer is that you also always have to be very open for other viewing points than your own.
Exactly. I think that that leads to more and more.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Henk. That was the question
Thank you,
that
Mariska.
came in. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then now we come to we will go to the study session. So we will close this YouTube. And well, I will round off in this way. First, about the next lecture. And that lecture will be about theosophical education. Next week, what does a harmonious development of our spiritual and mental and the psychical and even physical talents, what does a harmonious development of all those talents entail? How can we stimulate it not only in children, but also in adults, in our contacts, in our work? Well, we shall next week also give attention to the Raja Yoga School founded by Catherine Tingley in the headquarters of the Theosophical Society in California. But it will be a lecture for everyone. This, if you have children or not, if you have grandchildren or not, it is for everyone important. And so we hope to see you again next week. And we will conclude with this inspiring verse from the Rig Veda. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds, so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light. Thank you all.